All right. Thank you so much for doing this.
Of course, of
I
course.
was really interested in some of the blindness research you do and the company you're running and some of the studies you're doing, so we can talk about all that. I want to start by asking, so just for blindness in general, I know there's a vitreous substitute with Synacus you guys are trying to make. Can you just go over, like, in general, like challenges with solving blindness, why you guys think that the vitreous substitute gel is the best solution, and like maybe like some other potential solutions for like different blindness related like issues?
Yeah, that's a good question. So blindness is quite a broad term, right? It's a really broad term that they describe the consequence of very numerous eye conditions that affects hundreds of millions of people around the world. And at Synakis, which is the spin-off coming out of Dr. Molly Shorkett lab, we started by focusing really on one eye condition, which is called retinal detachment. So retinal detachment, to explain a little bit, is that there's this condition that involves that cell layer that is called the retina, that is in the back of your eye. And it can be caused by various factors such as damage to the eye vitreous humor. And there's that jelly-like substance that you have inside of your eye that fills the entire eye. So imagine that jelly substance inside of the eye that maintains that eye health starts to kind of degrade, and which then after detach the retina layer, and that's where it can cause serious problem. What you have right now when you have that retinal detachment condition, you go through a surgery that is called vitrectomy, and where the surgeon will remove the vitreous humor of the eye and replace it with what we call a vitreous substitute. That's why it's called a vitreous substitute, because it's a substitute to what you have in the eye. The problem right now is that you have only two types of solutions. You have either a silicone oil or heavy gases to do that. Problem with this type of vitreous substitute right now, they require the patients after the surgery to face down posture. So you need to put your head down for at least 18 hours a day. And you also have a blurry vision because this type of vitreous substitute are not transparent. So you have a very uncomfortable recovery, and it can go from weeks to months to do that. And on the top of that, when you take the silicone oil is very toxic for the body. It's efficacious. It can really stick the retina back to the eye. The problem is that it's quite toxic. So if you leave it for a long time, that becomes a problem. That's why like there's a secondary surgery at the end of that recovery process to remove the material. And so what we do like in the company, we thought of like then kind of having this opportunity where we need to design that, a complete different type of category of vitreous substitute. And so you must have heard of Dr. Rob Devaney. He's a world-renowned vitreoretinal surgeon, and he basically came to Molly years ago and really kind of wanted to help Molly design the perfect vitreous substitute to help his patients in the clinic. And Molly having a background of chemical engineering, so with the scientists in our lab, we thought of designing that perfect hydrogel substitute that can be degradable, transparent, and allow really patients to recover very quickly. That's what we do. Then Synakis kind of became a company that we started years ago now that is based on this hydrogel platform technology that can really help patients to recover faster and in a more comfortable way when they're going through that surgery in the eye.
Okay, would you just give me a sense of like how like the current recovery time for patients that have to go through eye surgery, like they have to be face down 18 hours a day, like how many
Mhm.
days is that
Oh,
they
it
have to?
goes from 1 week to even 4 weeks. It can go even for more than that for severe cases. So it's really depending on the patients. Some people have a very severe retinal detachment. Some of them has like a small retinal tear, so it's easy to heal. And so depending on the patient, it goes from 1 week to like up to maybe like 1 month or 2 months.
Which they have to be face down for 18 hours a day for like a week plus.
Yeah, the reason for that is because
Okay.
this substitute right now they are so the product or the material are less dense than water, so that's why they float. And in order for you to have the substitute to kind of push the retina back to the eye, it's a physical kind of tamponade, right? That push the retina back to the eye. You have to phase down so that you can really make sure that the retina is continuously, you know, against the back of the eye to kind of like stick it back, to the back of the eye to make sure that this is completely healed. So that's the thing. That's why you have to continuously phase down all the time. So that's why it's super uncomfortable as a process. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I imagine like the success rate for that must be low because it seems like if they like are upright at all at the wrong time during that like week or month, then the like healing process fails, right? Like is that
Yeah, so they have to really follow the protocol. The problem, like I do, like so. What from what we've seen, the patients are following the protocol. The problem is more that it's just really uncomfortable for the patients to do that. It's just really they can't work, they can't fly, they can't go anywhere for just weeks to months. So it's just like something that is really heavy in terms of, the daily life, doing that process. So that's kind of where we saw the opportunity, like, and especially if you think about it, vitreous substitute hasn't been changed for the past 60, 70 years. So it's still like something that has been using the same technology for such a long time that, I think it is time right now to think about a different way to look at that process. Yeah.
and then so can you actually just describe like in general what a like vitreous substitute is?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So as the name implies, so it's a substitute to your natural vitreous. So you have a jelly-like substance that is inside of your eye, that kind of gives you that shape, that globe shape of your eye. It's called vitreous humor, basically. And when that jelly-like becomes more and more liquid, then it loses that kind of physical stiffness to allow you to maintain the globe of your eye, right? The globe shape of your eye, and that's why you need that kind of vitreous substitute, which is substituting that vitreous humor to temporarily replace the retina to the back of the eye. So that's why it's called vitreous substitute, because it's not necessarily the real vitreous of your eye, but it's more a substitute to that jelly-like substance. Yeah.
And then is the general idea like the vitreous substitute would temporarily substitute the fluid in your eye and then later it would like be able to regrow? Is that kind of what the idea is? Or
So the problem with the vitreous humor, it's not replenishable. So it's something that is unfortunately in the human body would be replaced by saline humor. It's just more liquided. The problem with that is that with age, with a lot of patients, the jelly-like becomes a bit more liquid over time. It's just how it is, and then that's why the retina peels off. So that's why like the vitreous substitute doesn't permanently replace it. It just temporarily replace it so that it just stick back to the eye. But you might have this problem once again later on in your time. Like you might go through the surgery right now, for example, and 5, 10 years down the road, you might have the problem again because you don't have that jelly-like substance anymore. It doesn't come back again. So that's kind of the only right now treatment that is temporal that allows you to kind of fix it for a while, and then you might have to go through another surgery. You know.
okay, but then the substitute you guys are making, like that would be the patient's like permanent that would be their like permanent like fluid like like that would like stay in their eye for the
So it will stay
rest
there.
of
Yeah, so it will stay there, but it would degrade over time. So that's the advantage that we're thinking of. Because right now, when I talked about silicone oil, which is injecting inside of the eye to do that, silicone oil is not natural, right? So it cannot be degraded by your eye. If it stays in the eye, it gets toxic. So you need to remove it at the end. So you need to go through two surgery. What we have right now, it's a biodegradable product. It's you inject it in the eye, then it degrades over time, then it's not there anymore. But it's being replaced by a normal fluid, like a saline fluid inside of the eye to keep the health of the eye. But it doesn't stay there permanently. It just a very good advantage in terms of the fact that it can be biodegradable, so you don't have any risk of toxicity for the eye health over time.
okay, so it biodegrades and then is it like does the eye regenerate some of that fluid or does like
Yeah,
when
it
it
regenerate.
biodegrades like what's okay
Yeah, so we generate with the fluid that is not a jelly substance. It's more of a liquid substance. It's a saline. It's a natural saline humor that goes in there. That's like a saline solution that maintains the health of the eye, but it doesn't have that jelly-like substance anymore, you know.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Have you guys
Mhm.
done any trials in like animals, or like have you done any trials with this and seen a like rate of success?
So that's a great question. So far we did a lot of safety study. We did it in animals, in large animal models. We did it in rabbits because rabbits has a very size that is relevant to human eye. So that's why we use this animal to do that. We tested the safety in terms of like looking at the biocompatibility. Is it triggering any sort of inflammation in the eye? And we didn't see anything like that. We also looked at the functional study. So we looked at if, for example, we can still see the same way, still have the response from the light. So we did perform these kind of studies to look at the overall health of the animals. So we did that first. Right now, this summer, so that's kind of the exciting part. This summer, we're going to start the efficacy study. So far, we haven't done that yet, but this summer, we're going to start um, basically having a model in a mini pig model, mimic kind of the retinal detachment thing, kind of what you have in patients, and then see if that vitreous that we have, that we design, will be able to kind of uh, push that retina back to the eye and heal the retina over time. So that's kind of like the most relevant and the most kind of exciting data that's going to come in. Yeah.
Okay. Which are you said so you've done some things with rabbits and
Yeah.
then pigs? Do you say pigs?
Yeah. Mini pigs.
Mini pigs. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's because
Yeah. Yeah.
like their eyes are you said rabbit eyes are more similar to human eyes.
On terms of the size, but then like, so when we looked at the retinal model, when we look at detaching the retina, mini pigs are a more relevant model to that. They mimic better how would that happen in humans. So that's why in terms of the disease model, mini pigs was way more relevant. It depends really on the study that you're looking at. If you're looking at safety, because like this showing safety into rabbits, it's really compelling because rabbits are so easy to develop inflammation in the eye. So if you show safety in something that is really kind of easy to develop an inflammation, that means your product is very compelling in terms of safetiness. But then if you look at the efficacy, you need to think about another kind of animal sometimes too, because maybe their detachment model would be more relevant in the case of a disease model. You know?
Okay, I see.
Mhm.
And then for you guys to determine like if it's like efficacious, would you have
Mhm.
to um would you have to like have that study run for like a couple of years to see if the pig's eye like fully like healed?
Yeah. So right now, so the healing process takes weeks to 1 month. So the most important kind of time point, it's within that month. If we see that the retina is really well, attached to the eye, and it's like it's it seems like to be go back to the normal kind of stage, then that's kind of the most important time point. Then of course, it's still important to look at the degradation of the product over time. So we do look at the degradation of the hydrogel over 6 months to see like if it's actually gone because the you don't want something that is staying there over time. You want something that is really biodegradable because it's just otherwise it can just be toxic for the eye at some point. So that's why we're kind of monitoring that. But I think definitely in clinical trial later on in human, having that kind of study done over like a long period of time will be really important to look at the overall health of the patient. Yeah.
Okay. When you say biodegradable, like where is the material going? Like is it flushed out
Great
of their eye
question.
or yeah.
Yeah. So it's flushing out of the eye. So we still need to do a tox studies to understand like, the exact byproduct being degraded inside of the body. But so what to kind of tell you a bit. So the polymer we're using is called hyaluronan. So it's a natural polymer that you have,
It's
in
called
all over
what?
your
Sorry.
body. Hyaluronan.
Yellow rodent?
Um, yeah, it's HA, like hyaluronic acid. Maybe you heard of
Okay.
hyaluronic acid or hyaluronan. And so it's a natural polymer that you have in your body. And you have an enzyme that is naturally produced also by your body that is called hyaluronidase. And so that enzyme being naturally produced will degrade that enzyme, that polymer, sorry, and that's why it would just, be like flushed out of your body and going through like the normal metabolism, you know, which is like going through the liver, etc. But it's a natural polymer, so that's why we're very confident in the fact that it wouldn't really trigger any sort of toxicity because like it's already occurring in your body, in that sense. Yeah.
Okay, but when it's like flushed out, is it like flushed out? Like, would it go into like a person's system and then get flushed out, or would it
Yeah.
like be like okay?
Yeah. 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 So that's how it degrades, like, in the meta. But we still need to confirm that with a tox study, because the degradation of the hyaluronic acid is very well known. But then we still modified using chemistry to make it as a gel. So that's what we do in the lab to use chemical engineering to modify that polymer. So that's why we still need to perform these tox studies later on to really confirm, what type of, degradation product do you have in your body with this hydrogel. Mhm.
Okay. When you say tox study, is that like a toxicity study?
Yeah, just to see like, if like what can you detect, for example, in your blood? How much amount do you detect? Is it at a toxic level? Like it's a kind of a pharmacokinetic study, kind of. But in this case, because we're looking not at a therapeutic, we really want to look at just the degradation, product. If we can detect it, if we can, then that means like it's even lower than the limit of detection that you can have. So it must be quite safe in this case. Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you generally. I know you're in the middle of your PhD right now, and you're also running this company. Can you talk about kind of like generally? Because I think a lot of graduate scientists, PhD students, at least from what I've been exposed to, they're encouraged to start companies. They're encouraged to be involved in industry, but having to manage both is often like very challenging. Can you talk about how like do you manage both your PhD work and this company work, and also generally if you have tips for people who want to also do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess so I'm finishing my PhD this year. So definitely balancing a company and a PhD have been like a juggling act. It's been very, very, very challenging. It requires definitely a lot of planning, prioritization, and also like especially setting clear goals for both the academic and the entrepreneurship pursuits. I think that's really, really important. So what I usually do is that every week I kind of look at what needs to be accomplished and break it down into manageable tasks. You have to also be realistic of your time. Like we all have 24 hours. And that's why it's super important to be realistic in that sense. Um, I think one thing that I always did for the past 4 years was really to compartmentalize my time. So it's like, you heard of maybe time boxing. I very like just dedicate some specific hours. My research, for example, I would do, maybe for my research from 8 to like, let's say like, 5 or 6. And then, like later, like the evening after dinner, then I dedicate 2 hours maybe for like the company part or, because for the past couple of years, it has been more of a learning curve. It was more of a lot of notions to learn in business because I had no business background. I had no understanding of like, what is even a balance sheet, like as simple as that. What means like making a profit. And I need to really start from scratch from the beginning of my PhD. So I need to kind of start dedicating time, if even just watching courses, watching videos, understanding, you know, like what is it to create a company? I think it's so easy to say I'm creating a company, but what does that exactly mean, right?
No, I mean, like I imagine the harder scientific PhD work would be more technically challenging than like learning how to make a business. Maybe there's some like soft skills there that you have to learn more, but like
Hmm.
how I guess like was the learning how to make a business learning curve, like how steep was that
Uh,
curve?
for the business part, you're
Yeah.
asking, it was really steep. To be honest,
Oh, really? Okay.
like very, very steep. Like so it's kind of different. I know in Canada the education is a bit different, or even in the US. Like you have the option to kind of take an economic course. I think when you're young as in high school or even in undergraduate. In France, it's very kind of categorized. So if you're doing a science degree, then there's no notion of anything else. You have to just do science. So for me, it was very steep because I never even heard of anything business. Like I never heard of like, even investment. What does that mean, an investment? I needed to really learn from scratch what means the word investment or to have equity, like what means equity of a company. Like all these little terms, I need to even start learning that way, like a little kid, that needs to learn how to read, right? So I started that way for at least my first year. So because I knew how steep it was, when I started my PhD, I started also a master of entrepreneurship on the side as an online course. So it was like 2 years of that. So I went through that because I needed to really kind of set a good foundation of a business. That doesn't mean you know how to run a business, but at least you understand how to speak to people and then what people are saying to you, right? Because you can have a lot of great mentors. If they tell you a lot of things but you don't understand it, then you're kind of missing onto that kind of precious time to your mentors, right? So I wanted to really set that foundation. That's why I decided to take that kind of master at the time. It was really overwhelming at the beginning because of organization, as I mentioned. But then you figure out over time how to kind of, juggle between, the master and PhD and then building a company, etc. Hmm.
Okay. Yeah, no, I feel like a lot of knowledge with business, like some of it comes from the business courses, but then I think a lot of it is also just like learning by doing. Like a lot of
Hmm.
entrepreneurship, you can learn what like a balance sheet is or what like equity is, but then once you actually are like building a business yourself, then those things start to make sense as like where they come in.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. I
yeah.
feel like there's a lot of skills from, the PhD that you can really translate to your business. Like even doing a PhD, it's so self-driven and so like, you need to learn on your own for a lot of techniques in science. There's a lot of things that you're kind of an entrepreneur of your project already by doing a PhD. So I think a lot of the skills that I kind of acquired doing a PhD was just definitely translated to the entrepreneurial side of this. You know.
Okay. Oh, and that's interesting that that like there's like transferable skills from the like PhD. I think most
Mhm.
people think that like science PhDs and maybe just PhDs in general, the skill set's very different from business and like entrepreneurship.
I mean, I don't think so. For the hard skill, I don't think so. I found like there's a lot of like the part that is self-driven, the whole part that is, organizing yourself, like even the soft skills as well, actually. There's a lot of leadership as well because you still need to, for example, choose the right students that helps you out with your project. Like you need to really mentor them. There's a lot of like soft skills that is really transferable from a PhD to the business side. The only thing I would say is that it is also very different when you do basic science versus applied science or very translational science. In my case, I've always been exposed to translational science, so I can speak to that. How really we focusing on the problem, we're focusing on the need, understanding if there's a real issue behind. So it's kind of the same thing as building your business plan, right? Building a business plan is kind of understanding, what's your beachhead market, what's your customers, why would they buy it? Like it's understanding the problem before even trying to find a solution. So it's very similar in that way. That's why I really see a lot of parallels between the two of them.
Okay, that's interesting. I haven't heard that comparison made before, but that's interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I know you did your undergrad in Paris, right?
Hmm.
That's okay. Yeah, I also this ties in nicely. So I also wanted to ask you some of the differences in the entrepreneurship environment in Paris and even in like Europe in general versus the like US and Canada.
Hmm.
Have like you seen like big differences between those two?
There is difference. I mean, I can start with maybe the education system. It's kind of like start from there. Um, I found so studying in Paris, you know, really like helped me to have a very um like the academic environment of France, I would say it's very rigorous and theoretical. So it's a very huge emphasis onto the fundamental concepts, at least when you go in science, whether is applied science or basic science, it's very like, you need to know the theory. You need to understand your fundamental concept. You have to have a solid foundations. Like it's not really about, apply the science, try to like go do internship a lot, try to, understand like why you're learning this for. It's more like, just understand the concept. And then when I came to Canada and also the US, I found it was really a lot of practicality, but also innovation driven. So it's a lot of like, well, you learn that, but then where can you apply this knowledge to the real world problems? And I never had that perspective until I came here. So having said that, I found that because of that, then there's that kind of very different environment between America and Europe in the entrepreneurship after, and like in the environment is being translated from the education to kind of the business side of it. I found in Europe there's that kind of strong sense of tradition and very cautious approach in Europe. So it's really hard for like, startups to kind of thrive from the get-go if they don't have a big community that back them up. There's no like people like safety. Like there's less kind of risk and they like to invest in safety net. So even investors or VC company, they will always look at, well, I need to see that you're making profits. I need to see that you need to, uh, like can actually make that amount of money per year. So for me to believe in you and to actually invest in you. But early stage startup are very difficult sometimes, right? You need money. It's like the chicken and the egg problem, right? You need money to accomplish this, but then if they don't give you money, then you cannot accomplish that. So it's kind of going back the same thing. And I found in America, and I think everything is relative because even people compare Canada and US, right? And in Canada, relatively to Europe is way more risk driven, but then relatively to the US, then people say it's very safe. It's very cautious in terms of the investment. So I even see that when when we've been talking to a lot of our mentors, our business advisors, etc. They always tell us the US, you guys should maybe go to the US because they are way more risk adverse and risk actually driven, not risk adverse. And Canada is more like risk adverse, right? So I do find that in general, Canada, US, even though they still have differences between them, they're way more into let's put some risk into these new ideas, these new different ventures, and try to innovate more. And that's why you can see like, that a lot of early stage startup kind of thrive very quickly. And sometimes there are downsides to that as well. But I do find there's more opportunities as somebody that really starts from nothing or you don't have you know let's say much money for your ventures to kind of succeed in this environment.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting perspective. Yeah, because I know in the US there are a lot of startups that don't make profit for years. Like Uber famously didn't make
Yeah,
profit until like 12
yeah,
years in.
yeah,
I think two
yeah,
years ago it finally turned a profit. But yeah, there's some companies that are just backed by like venture dollars.
yeah.
Um,
And it's
okay.
just there's that kind of thrive of like the vision. I think as long as some people even have investment based on ideas, not even a prototype. And I think that's what's fascinating. I found like I was lucky to be in a very like translational lab where Molly has so much like knowledge in even starting business. She already have a company before, and also she's backed by a lot of like non-dilutive grants like in academics. So it's a really good foundation of resources to help you kind of build your prototype and before going out there and asking for money from investors. And I think that's already a very kind of privileged position to be in. But I do find that no matter what, being in America give you that kind of sense of, well, there's a possibility that if your idea is good enough, if your business plan is good enough, if you really thought it through the entire time, then you might have a chance to kickstart your company here. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I also know for biotech in particular, the path to revenue is often much more capital intensive, right? Like you have to put your product of your drug through lots of
Hmm.
trials. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah.
it's bad. It's really bad. Especially in therapeutics. Like we starting right now, it's in a case with a medical device, right? So it's a bit relatively less, money heavy, but it's still a huge amount of money to ask people to not even knowing if it's going to be successful in patients, right? So it's like you're burning a huge amount of cash, but not knowing if it's going to be successful. That's why you see sometimes some companies just really completely fail because they go from one day to the other, they completely shut down because the clinical trial didn't succeed. So they look at the phase 1 trial in patients, and that was a complete mess. And so that just didn't work out and the company shut down because it's just so money intensive and people just want to stop investing the moment that they see there's some negative results or not very positive data. Then they're like, well, I'm going to stop investing, right?
Yeah, actually, could you talk about generally like where the cost comes from for those like
Mhm.
trials?
I mean, before even the trial, it's even going through the FDA, going through even like Health Canada, the regulations. I think most of the cost even comes from that. So there's a lot of um, kind of set of criteria that you need to go through before even applying for a package to the FDA, whether it's IDE for a medical device or whatever it is needed for the therapeutic. Um, so for example, I give the example of our company right now. The big money kind of hurdle right now is really for the manufacturing process. So manufacturing something that can be used in human is actually quite cost intensive. So for example, for our case, we're looking at at least $1 million for even manufacturing a product such as ours to even apply for the FDA. That doesn't mean we're going to get the approval, but it means that we need to go through the manufacturing process, burn that money, get the approval, and then after start the clinical trial. So there's a lot of uncertainty, right, up to that point, but you still need to go through a huge ton of money before even going past the FDA, past all the regulatory processes, before even starting the clinical trial. There's so much cost intensive part. And then there's a lot of cost, you know, because you're working with other agencies, right? Like you're working with consultants that are very specialized in the regulations, consultants for clinical trial. You need some people to help you design a clinical trial. Like there's so much more cost behind just injecting into patients, or administering something into patients. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and then have you found that like you've had to go to the US to get VCs who are who like know the like biotech process, who are willing to invest like that like amount of capital? Or like have there been like
So
enough
so
in
far, to be frank, we haven't yet right now. So we really wanted to start by kind of because our goal right now is also to kind of make Toronto or even Ontario kind of a place where entrepreneurship is possible. And there's a lot of initiative happening from the government as well that allows you to kind of do that. So right now, so far, we really looked at the Ontario or the Canadian landscape because we really wanted to kind of focus on that. But having said that, we still, thinking about starting to explore the US. Like for example, in September, we're going to go to that conference called Resi in Boston, which is very focused on the US, more the US landscape, and it's very biotech focused to meet investors and angel investors, VC company, etc. So hopefully, we're going to be successful in kind of securing some funding for us. But yeah, so far we've been looking at the Canadian landscape because we still want to kind of grow that kind of innovation landscape, the entrepreneurship landscape of Canada, and not to just go to the US and you know and do that.
okay, so the goal is more like to try to use VCs and other resources in Canada first. And then
Hmm.
if you can't do that, then you'll go to the US maybe, or like you'll make that decision like at like a later date.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
And then like, do you think like if you were doing this in Europe, like in London or Paris or another major European city, like as like you said before, like finding that VC money in Europe would be harder
I
for
think
this?
so. I can't speak to what happened over the past 5 years because I haven't been there to see like what things have gone through. I know that initiatives have been like starting from the government in France about focusing on startup, etc. Um, it is still quite um, challenging to get funding. Like from some of my friends that are involved in startups, they oftentimes needed to go to the US or even just stayed in Europe, but found a VC, like a US VC company to help them. So at the end, it's for now the fund seems to be still quite limited, and still like it seems the mentality is still risk adverse. But I think there's a lot of learning happening, at least in France, from what I'm seeing, politically speaking, educational speaking, and etc. From the US or America in general. There's a lot of learning in changing their system and to try to invest more into early stage startup. So some people are doing that. Like I've seen even like some celebrities that started even like VC fund, etc., to really just focus on certain early stage startup, that are very, very, very early, some as early as an idea, not even a prototype. So there's that kind of initiative movement happening, but because they're still very early right now, so it's hard to say that, right now they're at a stage of the US in terms of, the, easiness of, you know, investment and finding funds.
Well, you
Yeah.
said there's celebrities that have VC funds for like funding European startups.
Yeah, they start to
Okay.
create like this funds, like this new, I guess they call it hedge fund for themselves or whatever. And it's like they try to gather a bunch of other celebrities to help them gather that funds for focusing on early stage startup. Like we have, for example, Tony Parker, who's a former NBA player, and he joined a group of angel investors right now to like really help, with the startup community, etc. So there's that kind of movement happening a lot, which I can see definitely going on, but it's hard to say if it's as good as what's the US is going through right now in terms of the VC money and how easy is it to get funds there. How hard to say that. Yeah.
Okay. Um, do you have like a general sense of like why it's more risk averse in Europe? Like, is it just because the systems are older, or like what's the main
Yeah,
reason?
I mean, from my perspective, is really the traditions, and then the fact that this history has been always based on really just like you say, all history, and I think because of that, we not that we're less advanced as a country or as a you know as a group of countries, as if you talk about Europe. I think it's more just the fact that we all based on old traditions. We also have less money as well. If you think about it, each country, like we're not as wealthy as the US. So the way that things are being distributed is different. Political system are different, right? As well. There are more funds maybe in the US because maybe they dedicate less funds to other type of category. For example, the healthcare system. For example, in France, we spend a lot of money in the healthcare system. Like that's why healthcare is completely free for everybody, and that's why it's working that way. But then there's other part that's lacking because of that lack of resources, right? So there's that kind of balance to things, right? If you look at just that point of view of entrepreneurs, then I think then there's a lack of resources for that. But then if you look at then the healthcare sector, then I do find like a lot of countries, even the Scandinavian country, or like yeah, France and even Germany, they have a very, very good healthcare system that show how much like how the money is being distributed in which part of it. And maybe for the US, even though I'm not as familiar with the healthcare system, from what I've heard, it seems that there's less it's not as efficient as the European system for that.
This maybe is a small thing. I think I read you did an interview where you said you did 2 hour planning sessions on Sundays to budget your time. Are there any other like specific time management tips that you have as someone who does a lot of different things?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things to it. I found I think definitely this 2 hour session that I'm doing every Sunday helps. It's not it's I would say that's a small thing out of the organization and the self-discipline, etc. I think what helps me the most is really the sports, actually. I'm very passionate by weightlifting and and just running and doing a lot of this physical activity. And if so and then that really helped me with my kind of focus. I found it's not about the amount of time that you put towards something, it's how focused you are during the time that you're putting towards work and etc. Um, and so for me, like definitely every Sunday I do that, kind of planning session for the week. But then every day, also, for example, my morning routine is always like, I wake up at 5, I go to the gym, and then I go sauna, and then I do meditation. That helps me to kind of try to set the day for success because you start by accomplishing the hardest thing, and then anything that comes afterwards is it's a bit easier. Um, and then during my day, I also don't do, for example, I don't work 3 hours in a row. I don't work 4 hours in a row. I found that is being really unproductive. And I was listening to this podcast. I don't know if you like listening to that one, the Huberman
Oh
podcast.
yes, yeah,
So
I have.
I'm very, very like into that podcast. And then he said, and I think he's really right, is he said like, if you can put your deep focus for no more than 90 minutes at a time and then take that 15, 20 minutes break, I think it's the best way to get things done and to actually be super productive. I found there's that misconception of like the more hours you put in there, the better it is, rather than just the more intentional and the more focused you are within that tiny amount of hours, the better the work will be done. I think so that will have been helping me a lot for the management because management is good, but then it's also applying it and also being super intentional. And I think having that routine of like every morning going through the hardest thing, which is, going to the gym, cold shower, sauna, etc., like heat shock, cold shock, etc., helps me to be well. That was the terrible part of my day. Then now I can go do other things that are like, easier relatively to that. So that definitely helps.
Oh, so you're a
Mhm.
fan of the like cold shock and then like hot shock
Yeah,
treatments?
I know it's a
Yeah,
it's a huge debate in a lot of this. Like some people say it's really bad, like it can cause a heart attack, and like there's a lot of risk to it.
I
I
haven't heard the
found
heart
it's
attack part. Okay.
I heard about like how if you have genetic predisposition to heart attack, like just be careful about that. But then if you are somebody that is really healthy and then you want to improve your cardiovascular system, then that's good for it. So it's really kind of depending on how you use it. But I do a lot of like cold, like I wish I could have a cold bath, that cold plunge part, but I do cold showers instead. But the cold shower sauna really helps me to kind of you know you know go through the whole, like it's a mentality thing, but it works for me to go through my day. Even some days are very stressful, that helps me to really just be like, oh, let's calm me down. And it also took me away from the whole social network with the, like, I don't know, social media, and I don't know, the emails and stuff like that. So you really kind of that kind of hour and a half where I dedicate to sports and sauna, etc., really helps me to get away from technology. And it really helps me to go through that without thinking about work at that time.
Yeah, no, I think definitely like the amount of like notifications we get, like emails and then lots of things with social media where you're constantly being like just
Yeah, yeah.
like hit with like notifications and yeah, really like makes you like really stressed. At least like for me it does.
Yeah, it's like stress, but also super distracted, like super scattered and distracted. I found there's so much information out there that it seems like you need to constantly, be on the top of the news, being on the top of your emails, being on top of everything. I found it gets super overwhelming. So having that time that is dedicated to yourself and just not thinking about anything else, and you cannot even have your phone in your sauna, that I think that's the most wonderful time, that I can use it for.
Yeah, actually speaking of like email and like notifications, do you feel like obligated to keep up with all scientific news about your area of research? Because I know some scientists like they feel, or I don't know if they feel like they have to or they do have to, but they have to read like a lot of like new publications in science, or sorry, in Nature and other things. And like a lot of times, like they have to read through full papers and then, or they feel like they have to read through full papers to like be like up to date. Do you also feel that?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's so important. I think it's in anything you do, I think it's important to keep to be up to date in whatever you do, even in business, like learning about the last deal that happened in my area, in my like startups, maybe like even from the same university, understanding like what they're going through, like which VC they went to, like all these things are really important to know and to be aware of. Scientifically speaking, is the same. Like I go through papers like pretty much every day, and if I don't have time, if today it's a experiment like heavy day, for example, then I just keep it in a folder, like in a folder that just like is entitled to be read, to be read. But then it's important to keep up to date because you want to make sure that what you're doing is not reinventing the wheel first, and what you're doing is actually impactful in science. So being up to date will help you just even focus on your science and to make sure that like what you're trying to develop right now is actually important and not something that somebody have done already, somebody has explored, and it's not really changing anything to the landscape of science, right? So I think it's being updated to that. I think that's super, super important. Yeah, of course you filter it. There's so many papers every day and from so many journals. You have to filter by credibility of the journal. So that's kind of what I do. I take, journals that have huge credibility where you know that any papers that will be published there will be very, very impactful. So it's gonna help me make sure like I'm gonna read that one because this one is in this journal. So I still need to filter, but definitely you have to be up to date for everything. Yeah, it's very, very important. Mm.
Okay. And then I also wanted to ask you what specifically made you want to go into this area of research, like into biotech, into like were there like seminal moments in your like undergrad or high school that made you want to pick this?
No, not at all. So I really didn't know what I wanted to do until like maybe at the end of my bachelor, like or even the beginning of my master. I I had an idea at the beginning. It was like, oh well, I know I'm just gonna get the master and then just like do like everybody does, which is going to consulting and then just get a lot of money and then just have a stable job and blah 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 and that's it. But then so I had this opportunity to go to this lab in Boston, at Dr. Jeff Karp lab. He kind of opened the eyes for me of like what translational research can be. So he's a prof at Harvard Medical School. He developed, I think, like started like 13 companies already. He recently wrote a book as well. Like he's very entrepreneurial and he has a lab as well of like at least like 20 people, like 30 people. And he really showed me how science that you just started from the bench can be actually be real out there. So he really showed me that path, and I found that was the first time I was like, wow, research is very interesting because I think for a long time I never liked to do research for just doing research. I don't think I am that type of scientist. Of course, like we need scientists like that are just scientists that are curious for just science. I always like to do science for a certain purpose, for a specific goal. And that's why, like, I've been like kind of also doing it within my PhD, and that helped me to kind of, be more motivated because you know that there is a potential. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but there is a potential to maybe get it out there and to build a company out of that. I think that part is for me fascinating that you can really do that from scratch.
Yeah, no, that definitely
Yeah.
is. That definitely is interesting. Um, do a lot of people go into consulting? Is like that kind of the path? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, at least like in Paris when I was in my bachelor degree, and also everybody was dreaming about going to consulting because it's a lot of traveling. It's intense, but like it's a lot of money, and like it's I think a lot of people are just like driven by oh the younger you get out, the better it is. But then I think for me, I always had the question of like what is actually is important, to make an impact. Now, how do you want to make an impact? I think I didn't have the answer for a while, until actually recently. I would say it's still recent. A lot of people have it. Sometimes they say like when they were like 15 or whatever, and good for them. I never had that. I always envy these people that knew what they were doing at that age. But I think for me it came way later when I really met Jeff. I think that was the eye-opening moment for me that research can be really, really cool in that sense. That is not just for publication, like publishing papers, but also for making an impact in like patients and just the medical world. I think that was the fascinating part of it. Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, no, I also envy those people who know exactly what they want to do
Yeah,
like
yeah, it's
early
definitely
on.
hard. It's hard to know. I found there's that misconception of like, when in high school they ask you like, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And then my answer was always like, I don't know. You know, I just don't know. Like I can't tell you. Like it's also hard. Also the generational different, right? I think that nowadays, it's kind of it's a generation where you can also change job, change career quite easily. It's not like, in high school you have to decide what you have to do for the rest of your life, right? So it's definitely a time that is very different, a generation that is different now for that.
I
Mhm.
think it's different, but there's also a good point where like what you do now does not have to be your like whole life.
Yeah,
Like you're
yeah, yeah. I
allowed to.
think because it gets so overwhelming if you think about it. Like, are you going to spend doing that for the next 40 years? I think that's so overwhelming, you know? I think like if for now you're interested in that, then maybe that's good. Maybe that's going to be good for the next 5 years. Maybe in 5 years you're not going to be interested in that, right? And I think that's okay, to not be, you know.
No, yeah,
Mhm.
I think definitely like people should. Yeah, I think definitely like the mentality should be like a like open-minded one, where like this is what you're doing now and for the foreseeable future, but like you're not like hard committing this because then people get
Yeah.
scared and they're like, oh, what if I get stuck? I think a lot
Yeah.
of people are afraid of getting like stuck somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's always been a problem. The getting stuck part is it's been always hard, but then I always kind of, take a step back. I'm like, oh, you can change. You can figure out other things and you can jump around. There's other stuff happening.
Okay, I'm sure the long sauna sessions help. The meditation and the sauna helps.
Yeah,
You like
yeah,
think about that? Yeah,
for sure, for sure. Yeah.
yeah. Maybe I should do that. Some long, long sauna sessions. Okay. All right. I think those are the main things I wanted to ask. Do you have any final thoughts that you wanted to share?
Well, I mean, I think it's advice for everyone. I always think like, just figure out what you want to like, figure out what you love first before even thinking about what kind of life do you want to have. Like I think it's so important to go back to the basic of like get away from people's opinion, what people tell you. Just think about yourself. Be selfish, I would say. Be selfish first before, you know, trying to please other people. I think that was the thing that helps me going through my years and to do what I do because a lot of people were saying at the time, when I started my PhD slash master, they're like, oh, you cannot do two degrees at the same time. Oh, you cannot do, you know, company and the PhD at the same time. You cannot do this. Just think about yourself and focus on what you think you can do and believe in yourself. And I think that's the most important thing to advance in life.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Good, solid advice. Okay. Okay. All right. I think that should be good. Thank you again so much. I appreciate it.
Sounds
Sounds
good.
good. Okay. Thank you so
Very,
much.
very nice
I
to talk
appreciate
to
it.
you.
Nice
See you
talking to you
later.
too.